Good morning, brothers and sisters. It is a joy to gather with you. We are going to be in Job chapter 6 and 7 today. That is on page 661 of your Pew Bible if you're using that. If you've never used a Bible before, it's all good. The large numbers are the chapter numbers and the small numbers are the verse numbers. I'm going to go ahead and read that for us. Job chapter 6 and 7. Then Job answered, "If only my grief could be weighed and my devastation placed with it on the scales. For then it would outweigh the sand of the seas. That is why my words are rash. Surely the arrows of the Almighty have pierced me. My spirit drinks their poison. God's terrors are arrayed against me. Does a wild donkey bray over fresh grass or an ox low over its fodder? Is bland food eaten without salt? Is there flavor in an egg white? I refuse to touch them. They are like contaminated food. If only my request would be granted and God would provide what I hope for, that he would decide to crush me, to unleash his power and cut me off. It would still bring me comfort, and I would leap for joy in unrelenting pain, that I have not denied the words of the Holy One. What strength do I have that I should continue to hope? What is my future that I should be patient? Is my strength that of stone, or my flesh made of bronze? Since I cannot help myself, the hope for success has been banished from me. A despairing man should receive loyalty from his friends, even if he abandons the fear of the Almighty. My brothers are as treacherous as a wadi, as seasonal streams that overflow and become darkened because of ice, and the snow melts into them. The wadis evaporate in warm weather, they disappear from their channels in hot weather. Caravans turn away from their roots, go up into the desert, and perish. The caravans of Tema look for these streams, the traveling merchants of Sheba hope for them. They are ashamed, because they have been confident of finding water. When they arrive there, they are disappointed. So this is what you have now become to me. When you see something dreadful, you are afraid. Have I ever said, 'Give me something,' or 'Pay a bribe for me from your wealth,' or 'Deliver me from the enemy's hand,' or 'Redeem me from the hand of the ruthless'? Teach me, and I will be silent. Help me understand what I did wrong. How painful honest words can be. But what does your rebuke prove? Do you think that you can disprove my words, or that a despairing man's words are mere wind? No doubt you would cast lots for a fatherless child and negotiate a price to sell your friend. But now, please look at me. I will not lie to your face. Reconsider. Don't be unjust. Reconsider. My righteousness is still the issue. Is there injustice on my tongue, or can my palate not taste disaster? Isn't each person consigned to forced labor on earth? Are not his days like those of a hired worker? Like a slave, he longs for shade. Like a hired worker, he waits for his pay. So I have been made to inherit months of futility, and troubled nights have been assigned to me. When I look down, I think, when will I get up? But the evening drags on endlessly, and I toss and turn until dawn. My flesh is clothed with maggots and encrusted with dirt. My skin forms scabs and then oozes. My days pass more swiftly than a weaver's shuttle. They come to an end without hope. Remember that my life is but a breath. My eye will never again see anything good. The eye of anyone who looks on me will no longer see me. Your eyes will look for me, but I will be gone. As a cloud fades away and vanishes, so the one who goes down to Sheol will never rise again. He will never return to his house. His hometown will no longer remember him. Therefore, I will not restrain my mouth. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. Am I the sea or a sea monster that you keep me under guard? When I say, my bed will comfort me and my couch will ease my complaint, then you frighten me with dreams and terrify me with visions, so that I prefer strangling, death rather than life in this body. I give up. I will not live forever. Leave me alone, for my days are but a breath. What is a mere human that you think so highly of him and pay so much attention to him? You inspect him every morning and put him to the test every moment. Will you ever look away from me, or leave me alone long enough to swallow? If I have sinned, what have I done to you, watcher of humanity? Why have you made me your target, so that I have become a burden to you? Why not forgive my sin and pardon my iniquity? For soon I will lie down in the grave. You will eagerly seek me, but I will be gone. There's something magical about moms. All right, that's a bit of an understatement. There are a lot of magical things about moms. But I think one of particular note is that their presence brings great comfort. For those in distress, a child who has fallen down and scraped their knee or feels alone, the mother's presence brings great comfort. I know this is true of my mom even now. When I am in distress, I go to her because her presence still brings me comfort. Friends, I wonder about you. In a life of great distress, where do you go for comfort? Where do you go when you long for a better present? Certainly in our passage today, Job longs for a better present. I think the main point that arises from this text is that we need a better presence if we long for a better present. If you are interested in a life without suffering, in a life that is right, a present reality that is free from sin and oppression, from suffering, from the pain of this life, friends, if we long for a better present, then we need a better presence. The title of my sermon today is Hope for the Helpless. Hope for the helpless. But you might be here today thinking, actually my life is pretty good. I'm not so sure I need a better present. I mean, sure, the world is a little bit messed up, but overall, I think I got things under control. Why do we really need a better present? Turn with me to Job chapter 6, and our first point, senseless suffering. Job chapter 6. We find ourselves in the middle of a conversation about suffering. But this is no intellectual conversation. It is intensely personal. Job, the man speaking, has lost everything. And I don't just mean like a bad week, like, maybe his electricity got cut off and the lights are out and he has to deal with all that mess. No. Job has lost everything. His wealth is gone, his flocks were stolen, his houses destroyed, and all of his children are dead. No, it's not just a bad week. Job is a man drowning in despair. And his words begin to make a little sense. His grief cannot be weighed. But it's actually even worse than that. Not only is Job experiencing senseless suffering, but this is a man who actually believes in God. He follows God. And amidst all this suffering, he is convinced of one thing, that God is actually in control. That God has allowed this suffering to happen. Look there in chapter 6, verse 4. Surely the arrows of the Almighty have pierced me. My spirit drinks their poison. God's terrors are arrayed against me. Job has lost everything at the hands of the very God that he worships. Where can we go in a place like that? Where can Job possibly go find hope in senseless suffering? Well, we see in verses 8 and 9, Job longs for death. Because at least death would bring peace. If only my request would be granted and God would provide what I hope for. What does he hope for? That he would decide to crush me, to unleash his power and cut me off. Job longs for death because that finally would be a place of peace in his suffering. What's odd, though, is that as much as Job longs to die, to be free from suffering, he doesn't deny the God that he worships. He never rejects God. He never declares God to be not worth believing anymore. Even there in verse 7, after begging God for death, in verse 10, he says, his one comfort in life is that he has not denied the words of the Holy One. He has remained faithful. Is the only sure thing in that. I wonder if you're here today and you find that intensely odd. I wonder if you find it odd that Christians continue to believe in God even amidst suffering. That someone like Job would continue to remain faithful to God even in the senseless suffering of this world. How could that possibly be? I wonder what would make a God like that worth trusting. What could possibly make God worth trusting in even in a world like ours? Well, we see Job longs for death. But if you're a good church-going person, you might be wondering, is that even okay? Is that an okay thing to long for? Isn't Job kind of disrespecting God a little bit? Didn't God create life? Job responds to us with a question. What else is there to hope for? What do you mean? What else possibly can I hope in? What strength do I have that I should continue to hope, he says in verse 11. What is my future? What is the point? Where am I really going? Things are not getting better. Why should I continue to hope? Since I can't help myself, what hope do I really have? Maybe you're here this morning and you identify with Job. What is the point of this life? Why even continue to hope? Maybe you long for death. What is our hope in this life if we can't help ourselves? Maybe, actually, you think it's just it's that next milestone. Hey, I can't help myself right now, but if I just get a little bit more money, I'll be all right. If I just get that next career placement, I'll be okay. Maybe I just need a spouse, a wife, a husband. Maybe I just need kids, then I'll be okay. Maybe I just need happier kids, then I'll be okay. Friends, the truth that Job confronts us, whether we want to admit it or not, whether we feel comfortable in it or not this morning, is that we can't help ourselves. Our world is full of senseless suffering. You know, the 5 to 10 year plans, the career relationship, the career maneuvering, relationship maneuvering, we can't help ourselves. The American dream that if you just work hard enough and do your best that you can have anything is a lie at the end of the day. Adolf Merkel was born in 1934 in Dresden, Germany. 22 years old, he took over the family company. Just a few years later, he would found Germany's first generic drug manufacturer, and out of this would build an empire of billions. In 2005, he would even receive an economic honor from the country of Germany for his investment in their economy. Merkel had it all. He had the dream. He had worked hard. He had made himself and his fortune. He had beaten the odds. But then in a moment of poor timing and a freak swing in the economy in 2008, one wrong investment, Merkel lost everything. Billions of dollars, financial ruin. Doesn't make any sense. Even a man who was so in control, even he couldn't help himself. Friends, we can fool ourselves into thinking that we can help ourselves. Or we can admit that we don't. But at the end of the day, we live in a world of senseless suffering. So where do we go? Where could we possibly go in a world like that? Brings us to our second point. Fickle friends. In verse 14, Job believes that at least, if not hope in his helpless state, at least he can find some help from his friends. A despairing man should receive loyalty from his friends, he says, even if he abandons the fear of the Almighty. At the end of the day, friends should be there to help. And we've been in a conversation. Job has aired his grievances. He's grieved before his friends the very nature of his life, and his friend Eliphaz has responded. So how would Job rate their response to him, their advice? He calls them treacherous as a wadi. Sounds bad. What exactly is that? Well, in America, we think of rivers. It's pretty steady going. I mean, think of the Chicago River, right? Its source is very steady. It is constantly flowing. But in the Near East, that was not the case. A wadi was like a type of river. It was a gulf or a channel in the desert. Whenever snow melted or heavy rain, it would flush with water. Seasonal streams that overflow become darkened because of ice and the snow melts into them. These rivers would suddenly be full of water and then in the same instant be gone. When their source of water dried up, so too the river would dry up and return to a ravine. This is how Job describes his friends, fickle as a wadi. When he goes to them hoping for water, hoping for help, instead he's turned away, ashamed, like merchants who go into the desert looking for water and find nothing. And the worst part is, it's not like he's asked them for anything. Right there he says in verse 22, he's like, I've never asked you for money. I'm not asking for your help. I'm not asking for you to go out and do some wicked things, turn the scales of justice on my behalf. All I'm asking for is for your friendship, for you to be there, for faithfulness. But instead, he finds fickleness. Instead of helping him, instead of being friends, his friends have tried to teach and instruct Job a little bit, help him understand himself. Job experienced incredible suffering, and his friend Eliphaz thought to help him out a little bit. And basically, what Eliphaz said to him in chapter 4 and 5 is, "All right, Job, here is what's up. You're a sinner, so you just need to repent a little bit, and then God is going to restore everything to you." His friends have decided that teaching Job is the best strategy here. So Job's like, "All right, teach me. I'll be silent. Help me understand why I did wrong." How painful honest words can be. Friends, I wonder, are we considering the effect of our words? Do we try to counsel those around us? Is our first thought when our friends are suffering, they're good, or is it instead how we can instruct them on where they've done wrong? Is it instead how we can prove that we know what's up? If only we would approach others with a posture of desiring their good, of considering the effect of our words on others. Job's friends hurt him because they didn't listen. They spoke about things that they couldn't possibly know. His righteousness, his sin status before God. Friends, let us strive to be a people that counsels others, not out of anything to prove in ourselves, but instead to love them. What did Job actually need from his friends? Well, what he needed was a better presence. That's what he says there in verse 28. "Please look at me. I will not lie to your face. Reconsider. Don't be unjust." Reconsider. What Job wants from his friends is to be seen, to be heard. For someone to actually sit down and listen to what he's saying. For someone to pay attention. What is Job's suffering exactly? Compares it to a hired worker consigned to forced labor on earth. Like a slave who longs for a shade, like a worker who longs for his pay. What is that pay exactly? What is Job trying to do with his image? Oh, it's the end. It's death. Job longs for the end to his suffering. Job longs for the day when finally the months of futility, the troubled nights will be over, and he can be at peace. Job has lived a hard life. A life of suffering. A life with fickle friends. A life that makes one long for the end. But what's even worse than a hard life is a hopeless life. Yes, his life is hard. He longs for the end, but there also seems to be no point. Like there in verse 6, "My days pass more swiftly than a weaver's shuttle. They come to an end without hope. My life is but a breath." Not only is Job's life difficult, not only are our lives full of senseless suffering, but they never go backwards. They only march forwards. Life is short. It is brief and bitter. A weaver's shuttle is just a piece of wood that zips back and forth across the loom, here one moment and gone the next. Like a breath of air puffed out on a cold day. For a moment, it hangs in the air and then it's gone. Like a cloud that vanishes quickly. Life is here one moment and gone the next. Which begs the question in all of our suffering, what is the point? What is the point of our suffering? We can never go back. I mean, I understand a difficult season where you maybe learn some lessons and grow as a person, but what about suffering that doesn't end? When the pain and sickness of old age creep in and you can't go back and relive a life of youthful vigor. When your kids reject you, or your spouse leaves you, and you can't go back to a happy home, what is the point in suffering like that? Because we all move forward towards death and we can never return. This is Job's complaint in verse 10. He will never return to his house. His hometown will no longer remember him. What is the point of my life if this is all I got? A life of senseless suffering and fickle friends. brothers and sisters, if we are to find any hope in suffering, we have to start here. It's a lie to start anywhere else. It is a lie to say that life is really just full of joy and gladness, that friends are always faithful, that suffering always makes sense. It's just not true. Life is full of senseless suffering and fickle friends. We need to start here, but we can't end here. Empathy alone isn't help for the hopeless. So where can we go to find real help? Friends, we must go to a better presence. Brings us to our third point. We've seen senseless suffering and fickle friends. Now we come to grief before God. Chapter 7, verse 11. Where does Job go in all of this? Job cries out to God. Therefore, I will not restrain my mouth. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. Job cries out to God because if his suffering is really from God, where else can he go? Where else can he really hope for answers? Where can he go for help in this hopeless situation? Friend, whether you're a Christian or not, run to God with your suffering. Cry out to God with your pain. Who else could give an answer worth listening to? What is Job's complaint to God? What is the bitterness of his soul? Simply that God is too close. God seems to constantly be pressing in on him, to the point where in verse 16 he says, I give up. I will not live forever. Just leave me alone. Leave me alone, for my days are a breath. Life is so short, God. Just leave us alone. Let us live in peace. Why must we suffer? Why must constantly pay attention to everything we do? After all, Job says, what is a mere human that you think so highly of? Like, well, I'm not that important, God. Really, could you just stop paying so much attention to me? Don't stop inspecting me every morning, putting me to test every moment. Just leave me alone so I can live my life. What's heartbreaking is that in the beginning of this book, Job had a relationship with God. Job was actually in right relationship with God. At this point, Job has been through so much, he's given up. Given up on returning to right relationship. At this point, Job is desperate just for some peace. I wonder if you can relate to that. If you're anything like me, sometimes it feels like it would be better if God just left you alone. God stopped pressing in. Maybe that's what it feels like he's already done. Friends, I think Job's view of God is too small. The God that you and I want, the God that Job so wants. I mean, it sounds really nice, but it is so cold. It's a God that doesn't care about what's happening in Ukraine right now. Doesn't care about the atrocities committed there. Doesn't care about murder or rape, death or divorce, cancer diagnoses or mental health crises. It's a God who doesn't care when parents abandon their children, spouses abuse their lovers. It's a God who's not there in the loneliness or anxiety, depression or despair. A God who leaves us alone is a God who doesn't care. And I don't know about you, but if that's God, I quit. To hell with that God. We need a better presence. A better God than even you or I could possibly hope for. We need a God who's present in our lives, who cares. Although I will admit it is a bit of a scary thought. I'm with Job on this one. If God is really God, and he really is present, that is a scary thought. Yes, we want a God who is present, but we also need a God who has mercy on poor, broken people like us. We need a better presence. And that's what we have in the Bible. That's what we have in Jesus Christ. God choosing to enter our suffering. God choosing to be with us. Not as an adult, God could have showed up at 33 and done his cross stuff and then moved on. But God chose to be born as a baby, Jesus Christ, and then live his entire life, experience the suffering that he experienced, experience a life of senseless suffering and fickle friends. We have that God in Jesus. But I wonder, did Jesus really know our anguish? Does he really know Job's cry? Friends, in John 11, Jesus stood before the tomb of a friend, and he wept. He knew the grief of the grave. He knew how brief and bitter life could be. Jesus wasn't far removed from the suffering of this life. No, he was intensely aware. We don't just have a God who cares, though. We don't just have a God who's able to sympathize with us. No, because in John chapter 11, we also have a God who's able to do something. After weeping at the loss of life, Jesus called out to that tomb, called out to the empty grave, called out for Lazarus to come forth. And Lazarus got up from the dead. How can Jesus have authority to possibly do that? How can Jesus possibly not only care, but also have the ability to fix suffering? Moments before Jesus spoke those words to Lazarus, he spoke these to his sister. I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even if he dies, will live. Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Jesus claims the authority of life itself. He claims the authority of God. And yet he is a God who cares. He is a better presence, with authority to make a better present. Can we trust that? How could we possibly trust those words? I mean, they sound too good to be true. But Jesus didn't just raise Lazarus. Not long after that, he would die alone, outside the city, hanging on a cross. The most innocent man in the most senseless of suffering, abandoned by fickle friends. But 3 days later, he would get up from the dead. He would ascend into heaven. The same God who came, who experienced the suffering that we experience, is a God who now sits enthroned in heaven. So where is hope for a helpless people? Friends, if you long for a better present, there is a better presence. The presence of Christ. A God who cares, and yet a God who is able to fix all things and who will make all things new. He came once experiencing the suffering we experience, but he will come again. He will come again to fix sin and suffering, make all things new. Friends, this is why we as Christians run from sin. Not to be good people or to follow the rules, but because we need to make our own present situation better. I don't need to hurt others in order to make myself better. I don't need to domineer others in order to make myself better, because I can trust the one who has said he will make all things new is going to. We have a better presence. We can trust that. Not necessarily right now. Can't promise you a life of health, wealth, and happiness. Can't promise you the one that you follow suffered greatly. Even willingly chose suffering. Now, the presence of Christ might not mean better circumstances, but it does give us certainty as we look forward to a better present. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, we long for a better present. We are a helpless people in need of hope. When we cry out like Job, a world full of senseless suffering and fickle friends. And yet, God, we also trust that you are God who knows our pain and our weakness, who came not only just to empathize with us, but also to make all things new. Also is a God who is able, for those who trust him, for those who turn from sin and turn towards him, to heal the suffering of this world, who will come again and restore things to the way they were meant to be. Lord, we pray people who trust you. Amen.
About this text.
Man, I think just like the honesty of life is a time of suffering, but knowing that God is not the God that Job thinks he is. That God is a God who does draw near and in such a ways to help his people, not just to hurt them and oppress them. So.
Brian, what encouraged you?
I liked how much you just leaned into the terribleness of the situation, because I think we tend to apologize that way sometimes, and it's just like it's okay to say that this really, really, really sucks, and I just feel like that gives anyone who's in that kind of place some comfort.
Yeah, similar to that, like I was encouraged by this idea of helplessness, and like there are things that terribly suck and like that are very much beyond my capacity to repair.
Yeah, I like your gospel connection, and you showed it as Jesus coming to his friends, and just he's got grief, but then he can do something about it. And wow. So what did you try, or what do you think you kind of fell short of what you wanted to try to do? Or?
Yeah, I think the two big things that I feel right now are like the tension throughout the sermon, and like such a big section, a lot of things going on in what Job is saying, and knowing where to like sit and where to kind of move. I really felt that challenge while I was preaching, and then also like I'm still really wrestling with like the gospel and wisdom. I think like I like the gospel connection, but I wasn't sure like how much how to be specific and then also broad with the gospel, how to say the whole kind of gesture towards the whole gospel, but also be specific, and I kind of wrestled with that.
Brian?
Yeah. My biggest critique is I felt like a little bit in the third point. It felt a little bit like the God of the Old Testament versus the God of the New Testament, and I know that you weren't doing that, but I think you just need to distinguish that a little bit more. Just that what Job was thinking God was, because it just came off a little bit like God of the Old Testament versus God of the New Testament kind of thing.
I knew that about that, but that's true.
I think there's two kind of like big questions that either weren't answered or I found myself asking at the end of your sermon. Point 2, you use this phrase a lot, like, what's the point of our suffering? And I don't know if I got a clear answer to that. And then the question I was left with at the end was like, how does Jesus make my present better? Like, you definitely argued for he makes my future better, but I don't know if you, I don't know if I came away, maybe you did, but I don't know if I came away with a clear understanding of how Jesus makes today better.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I think for me, like at the beginning, point 1, like your tone and your energy was solid, and then it kind of like hit point 2, and it seemed like you got tired and quiet, and then point 2 just seemed like it kind of like drug on, and that's where maybe that concept of that tension just kind of got lost and spread out there.
Yeah, I felt like, oh man, it's going. I could like, because I just knew in my head, I was like, man, this is just going on. Like, I'm not super engaged, so like, I can't imagine anything's going. I just couldn't figure out how to work that one out. So I was like, oh. Yeah, no, that's helpful.
Okay,
my second one is that I think I was kind of confused in your introduction a little bit, and then I just didn't see how it like fit into the bigger picture and stuff. Because I was like caught up on like you talking about your mom at some point, and I was like, wait, and I just didn't understand the transition into the rest of the text. So, and I'd love to see if you got that introduction figured out bring it back in at the end, or how the gospel connection answers that
Yeah.
issue or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I forgot to do like an actual transition from the intro to the.
Yeah, this is similar to Andre's, and like I definitely think it was a little bit more exaggerated here, but nonetheless I think it's somewhat of a consistent thing.
Yeah.
Just like you can get in this very like static, or stagnant pace and cadence, you know. It's just like I'm gonna say it like this,
Yeah.
and then like this,
Yeah.
and it just kind of like there's no variation in that
Yeah.
cadence.
Yeah.
I do think it was a little bit more today than usual, but nonetheless there.
Yeah. Yeah. Were there certain points where you felt like it was more or less
I mean,
stagnant?
when the gospel came out, it
Yeah.
started to like get a little bit, and like so part of it probably was like, okay, it's also like a tonal thing,
Yeah.
given this passage. But at least for the back half of the sermon, I noticed it, and it was pretty consistent. I don't know.
Yeah, when you got back in, when you got to your gospel connection, you picked back up.
Yeah.
The energy.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got
Yeah.
excited again about what you were talking
Sure.
about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you guys have any tips for being excited about like real grieving passages.
Well, it's not necessarily excitement. That's why I put it as like pace and
Yeah.
cadence,
Yeah.
because it's just.
Mm.
So I mean, it lost like the conversational aspect of it.
One way that I think I could give you a little piece of advice on this is the first sermon I ever preached on a Sunday morning was Matthew 6, do not be anxious. I have generalized anxiety, and so like it is a tougher sermon, but I was like, but getting really personal of like hey, some of you might be thinking this, like, I'm there too. You know, kind of just putting yourself in a little bit, because there's at times that it just felt a little bit disconnected. And
Yeah.
I think if you like let in like how you felt like Job, or like times that have been like that, that would help draw people in without having to like raise the excitement level. Because like whenever you get personal, like people naturally are always like drawn to that and stuff. So.
Yeah, and then mine just goes actually back to Dave's also. Like you raised a lot of good questions, but I don't know if all of them got quite answered.
Did you have other questions that I'd rate, or like were those the two big ones, or were there some others that you noticed that?
How can Christians keep trusting that God in the midst of the suffering was at the front end? And it just seemed like as the sermon kept going, it just was, the picture kept getting darker and darker.
Yeah.
Is it okay? Oh, to long for death. I can't read my writing on this one. There's one more there.
Yeah. Some of them also, it's like trying to figure out how to like introduce a question to like create tension, but then you like pay off on it later.
Yeah.
And I think some of that's like,
Yeah.
should remember that I asked that question and make sure to like,
Yeah.
because some of those aren't necessarily like in my notes, and so it's like remember to pay off on that. Like,
Yeah.
so that's
And don't ask a question you can't pay off on.
right,
Yeah,
or that you're not going
absolutely.
to, or
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Like-
And then some of them, like, I don't know how to ask a question just to, like, but not, never answer, but in such a way that it's, like, you're just, like, helping people think, you know, but that you don't necessarily, because some quite, like, you know.
Well, yeah, but I mean,
Yeah.
it's like asking like, what is the point of our suffering?
Yeah.
Versus asking like, how do we find purpose in our suffering?
Yeah.
Right. It's like you can answer those very differently.
Mhm.
With one, you kind of have to like give a lockdown answer.
Yeah.
The other, it's kind of like, well, here are different ways we navigate that.
Yeah.
So even the way you frame the question, you could
Mm.
essentially be asking the same thing, but based on how you frame it, it's like, I'm not expecting you to give me a lockdown answer.
Yeah.
So like,
Yeah. That's helpful.
So do you think you did well?
What's the question? Did you think you did well? I'm not gonna answer that question. I feel like things that I thought I did all right. I think like trying to use title and trying to like homiletically, like the organizational, the main points, the homiletical points, the title, like trying to use those. I don't know if I did it very creatively, but at least trying to like pepper them in to give like a general sense of like this is where we're going.
Yeah, you did that well.
So
That was good. Well, for as much as we have harped on you a little bit for asking questions, you asked some really good questions, like some very thought-provoking questions and stuff. And you did answer some of them. You didn't answer others, but they were good questions. And so I felt like even though the pacing was a little slower and everything, I felt like every time you asked a question, it helped keep me engaged. And so yeah, I thought that was really, really good. Like I have probably 8 questions at least written down, and so most of them were good, very thought provoking. So
Yeah, I definitely agree with that on the questions. I really liked your gospel connection. I was curious where you were gonna go. Did we go John 11 in class? I can't remember doing that. And then Andre hinted at it as an encouragement point, where it's just like, oh, there was a few anchor points there, and then when you turned it, like, oh, but he also has the power, not just that he experiences suffering. That was really good.
Yeah.
Wait, can I show you? I know it's still we're in positives now, but in terms of maybe it's positive, maybe it's critique, but in terms of the gospel, like I'm not sure I don't know how I definitely asserted. Well, I think I showed God does. Jesus cares, and also Jesus has the power. But I'm not sure I ever adequately explained how that works out when you're not Lazarus, how that works out for the rest of us, how the cross plays into that. Did that make sense, or was it kind of ooh, that was a little bit lacking?
I think that was my I don't understand how Jesus is making my present better.
Okay, right.
I get that he cares. I get that at some point I'm going to heaven with him, but I don't know about today.
Did it make sense how?
eschatological hope?
Yeah.
Right.
Not a.
Right, which is fine, but your argument was talking about my present.
Yeah.
You brought it to the present, not me.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Did it make sense how, at least on the eschatological side, that works or anything, or did that seem a little bit vague? Just God cares and He's gonna do something.
No.
I felt like it worked.
Okay.
I think it was all legitimate, but just like you're saying, you presented one question, answered it.
Yeah.
Another.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah.
That's helpful.
I thought your applications were peppered through in good spacing, and then the Merkel illustration,
Yeah.
it worked well right there.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. Specifically, when in your first point you said the American dream is a lie, and I was like, dude, you should have said that again, because it's so true. There's just such this mindset that we have that if we do right, good clean living produces lack of suffering and stuff, and it's just that is a really good point. And like he said, you sprinkled a lot of applications throughout, Job, Jekyll, and friendship. Job didn't need someone to come and correct him and stuff, and so I thought there's just the way you said you called the church to not be that way, to just don't be that guy. I thought was all really good.
Yeah, I really liked, and you do this quite often, but asking really good questions, making really good concessions, you're clearly, there's an earnestness with it of I'm actually trying to think about how this text works in real life, not just in our Bible land, and you just always do a good job with that.
Yeah, same thing. Just I wrote down the questions were good, especially the one about is it okay to long for death. And I actually liked.
Andre said that really spoke to me. How about that? We can talk after the camera's off.
These cool Chicago winters.
But I actually liked your introduction. It was short and simple.
Yeah.
But that concept of presence hit me. Okay, we all can identify.
I gotta figure out a different. As soon as I started talking, I was like, it's pretty awkward to go from reading that text to be so moms, am I right? So I was like, I need to figure out how to make that transition a little better, and then the transition out. But I appreciate that.
I'm not gonna lie, I kind of felt like that was okay, because it was you kind of regather the attention, because you kind of get out of the text and you're like, what did we just read?
Yeah.
And it kind of felt like it was we don't have to jump in immediately.
Yeah.
Let's take a little bit of breather and let's
Yeah.
think about what is this concept that we're going to be talking about
Yeah.
today. So
One other way to do it is if you tell that, if you say the same thing but in the form of a story, right? You kind of have more leeway. It's not just this hard
left that you're making.
Right. Right.
Whether it's about you, like stubbing your toe and running to your mom, or
Yeah.
about like, you know, some little cousin you have and like
Yeah.
when they trip, they run to their mom.
Yeah.
Like if you tell it as a story, then it just doesn't seem like what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because when you set it up as a story, like, okay,
Yeah.
the point's gonna come at the end, we understand.
Right.
that.
Right. Right. We'll suspend disbelief for a little bit.
Yeah, exactly, yeah, suspend
Yeah.
disbelief, that's a good way to put it. Sweet.
Ready?